our online Q&A. Hello, hope you enjoyed the concerts and welcome to our online Q&A. Unfortunately, Daniel is having some technical difficulties and couldn't join us right away. So I'm sort of filling in as a temporary host, but we have with us Suzanne Lemieux and a special guest all the way from Cape Town, our former music director and great friend, Bernhard Güler. So welcome. And you just heard Haydn's London Symphony number 104, his last symphony. Haydn made several trips to London, and he was a great success there. He was wooed there by an impresario named Solomons, and Solomons was constantly trying to get. He thought that Haydn was vastly undervalued by the Esterhazy family, and he constantly was trying to woo Haydn to come to London. And finally, when Prince Esterhazy, the one who loved music, died, and his successor, I think it was his brother, who, although Bernhard, maybe you know better than I think his brother took over, and his brother was not a music fan, so he put Haydn out to pasture, and then Haydn felt able to finally come to London, and it was a massive success. He wrote wonderful, wonderful symphonies, all of which have nicknames, most of which have nicknames, some of which have nothing to do with his time period. A few of the nicknames happened 100 years after his first performance. So it was very interesting how these things happen. This symphony was a lot of fun to play and to perform. And if you want to watch it, the full Haydn performance is available on YouTube. We have audio for the first three movements and video for the last. But Bernhard, you're in a unique position where you were playing in an orchestra and also later conducting. So which do you prefer? Do you prefer to play Haydn or to conduct Haydn?
I would say conducting. There are pieces where I prefer to play, but Haydn is definitely one where I prefer to conduct. It is an unbelievable piece. I mean, a nice effect of his ability to go to London was that he had a much bigger orchestra there. And therefore he could write a piece like this, 104, which is much more massive than other symphonies he wrote in Austria. And that is, this piece, 104, is really an absolute climax. Not only in his life, but in the whole symphonic literature in this period.
Yeah. It's beautiful writing, and it's funny. When I was in school, I had a music teacher. We were having a history of music class, and we're studying the classical era. And one of the students asked, how can you tell the difference between Haydn and Mozart when you're just hearing a blind recording? And the teacher said, well, Haydn's good, but Mozart is when the sun comes out. And so he gave the impression always that Haydn was sort of a second-rate Mozart. And I don't think so at all. I think that's a common misconception. But Suzanne, when you play those Haydn parts, this is
the tragic of his life, that he was always in the shadow of Mozart. Mm-hmm. And he was, in terms of developing music, composition technique, orchestra technique, much more important than Mozart.
And even
much more important.
Even the chamber
music. He created the string quartet, he created the sonata, he created the symphony, he created the symphony orchestra. And Mozart only took this, what he has already created, and he made particularly nice music, but nothing really new or revolutionary. Haydn was the big figure, actually.
Yeah. I think the string quartets, the late string quartets, I heard one just a few years ago live. I think live music in this time of pandemic, I'm going to say, that's the best. But like that. I was at a concert and the St. Lawrence Quartet were playing one of the late quartet. This sounded like so modern, so fantastic, just way ahead of his time. And I think if you do Baroque enough and then you come to Hyden and you know where he came from and just his ideas on the sound. Right, like the sound of the oboe, how it fits in a Baroque piece, but then Haydn just takes that and he makes a new orchestral sound.
Yeah. Yeah.
So-
And yeah, I mean, Mozart is maybe a little bit more elegant.
Yeah.
But Haydn is very earthy, very down to earth, real. Mozart is always, there's always never, that always actually, man shouldn't say this, but that always disturbed me a bit with Mozart. You never feel that he was fighting.
Yeah.
Everything was easy.
Yeah.
It always came in one piece.
Yeah.
Haydn that was a bit rougher. That was, yeah. Okay,
When we play Hyden,
critical.
sorry, I'm just cutting in.
Yeah.
We played one a few years ago with you, Bernhard, and I hadn't played it before. I would say 80s maybe, anyway. And I listened to several recordings, and there was this oboe solo in the minuet, or in the trio of the minuet and trio movement. And one of the recordings, or maybe more than one, had a lot of ornamentation. And you know, it would be difficult to do that in a Mozart symphony. But in a Haydn symphony, even you didn't. You didn't, you know, oh, don't do that. You, like, I think it works, you know, he was still part of that.
Yeah.
But I don't think Mozart, you could do that. Yeah.
So, Suzanne, what kind of a sort of oboe technique is changing during Haydn's?
Well, the instrument is changing, so he is able to write in more keys, especially. Right, like the E flat and D major are good for the Baroque oboe, but Haydn goes a little bit beyond that, and also in the range, and maybe in the voicing, like sometimes with the other woodwind instruments. So Bach is his own man, but like Handel, he brings the oboe and the violins together a lot, and then the oboe can be solo and then back with violins. But Haydn, he is more broader, so you're listening to the trumpets and you're listening to blend with the flutes in a different way. Yeah, it's in the sound, I think. Like for me, when I'm in the orchestra, I can think of what the right sound to make, like timbre of the instrument somehow.
And Symphony Nova Scotia has exactly the right size for Haydn Symphony, for this 104, for example.
Yeah.
And it really, we played it quite often, this 104.
Yes.
And the orchestra always played it so wonderfully, and it was really a special piece for you.
Yeah.
I really hope that I have another chance in my life to do this, specifically this symphony again.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure you will.
I hope so. Yeah.
Somebody has
in Halifax.
Yeah.
Again.
Somebody has written in a question here. They're just asking us if you were going to write a symphony for a city, what city would it be? So I realize these London symphonies were written for this trip to London, but just if you had to write a symphony for a city,
I would have to write a city.
Yeah.
Oh.
What city do you think deserves to be immortalized in music?
That's. I don't know whether there is a Vienna symphony, which is quite ambitious, of course. And you think, what happened in this city?
Yeah.
But this city is for me most connected to music and deserved actually that there would be a musical monument for this city. It doesn't exist, at least not to my knowledge. Nobody wrote something. Yeah, I think Vienna.
Suzanne?
Prague, I think. I haven't been many places, but Mozart did it already.
Oh, yeah.
And I went to Prague and it hadn't been bombed, and it was just so lovely. And I thought the people were very nice and very easygoing. And I thought, ooh, like, how unusual. And it didn't feel like
I didn't quite
former communist. Sorry?
Did you say, I didn't understand.
I said,
did you say Prague?
Yeah.
Prague.
Yeah, I didn't understand. There's some interruption.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be like you can imagine writing music.
Yeah.
And you, Max?
Boy, I don't know. I think Chicago might be kind of a cool thing, but but Chicago or Paris, but or Singapore. Although there's very interesting cities, like just something. I think there's something. As if a city's interesting, I think it would make interesting music. So I can't decide. I know.
Yeah.
Somebody already wrote the Paris Symphony, Mozart, right? So
yeah.
So that's interesting. So Bernhard, I always wanted to ask you, if I know we traditionally set up the orchestra in a certain way, but I also know that in Haydn's day, that wasn't necessarily standard. There was no real standard of orchestral setup. So if you had to create something, just an orchestra of Haydn's size, would you change the setup to take advantage of the music? It works well the way it is?
I would leave it exactly as it is. And obviously there is no true setup for an orchestra. Because there were all kinds of, and obviously nothing was so convincing that, okay, now we do only this, except this one, which means first, second viola, cello, bass. Yeah. That is actually the one which was obviously most convincing. So I wouldn't change that.
Right. I recently did a concert, and they tried to mix up the seating, so the cellos and the basses were interspersed. So one cello, one bass, one cello, one bass, and the violins were across the front of the stage. So firsts on one side and seconds on the other, and it was really interesting. I know some choirs do that, where they mix up all the singers so that you don't have sections of singers. But it was really interesting to play like that.
Yeah, but it is probably an effect. And because one didn't hear this effect yet, it's interesting.
Yes.
But does it really have an influence on this composition, or that it sounds suddenly completely new?
No.
I don't. Today, especially when you play the normal old music, you have to do something new to make it a bit interesting, and I think many things happen because of that.
Yes, I think sometimes, especially in classical music, you really want clarity. So I think that bringing those sections together enhances that, and as a listener, you really can define how the piece is written.
That's one thing I found playing.
One can do this very well in this setup, which we usually have, but you also
have. Somebody's written in a question: what memories do you have from the performance 2 years ago, and is there something special that stands out? So is there a special memory of this performance for this Hyden 104? Yes.
Well, the main remembrance or memory is that it was particularly good, which was always with this piece. I said it already. There is some special connection with your orchestra in this piece, but this, maybe because we played it already so often, was particularly good in this concert. Thank God. I thought there is only the fourth movement, but there's obviously the whole piece, at least to listen to. I'm very happy about this. That was really an unforgettable pleasure to conduct this piece.
Yeah, I think
you really know everything works well because we have done it already, and now you can do a bit what's maybe not written exactly in the music, and so that was great. Yeah, that was really great.
Yeah, I think when we have played something a lot, then we can react. When you conduct it and it's lighter, everybody knows how to do lighter. You don't worry that you're going to make a mistake because you feel good about playing. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was
a lovely. Yeah.
I must agree. Yeah, I felt the same. It was so much fun to play, and especially when we get to that last movement, it's just like, oh my God, right? It's just, we're out of the gate and we're going. It's just and you never you never lose sight of the fact that you're making this wonderful music. Like there's a spontaneity about it, even though it's, 250 years old. It still seems fresh to us.
Yeah.
That also shows the quality of a piece that after such a long time, after very often listening to it, after very often playing it, it's still fresh and exciting. That is the greatest sign of a great masterpiece.
Mm-hmm. Almost like it was there already, and he just wrote it down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true.
I think very often, especially so with pieces like Kleine Nachtmusik, so absolute perfect pieces. Absolute. You think it cannot be done or made by a human being. That must have already existed, and he was lucky and he found it and took it on the paper.
Right.
Yeah, it's amazing. And that is actually something which, the older I get, I must say, the more each time I am amazed and speechless and stunned what especially musical masterpieces there are. And that something like this was possible. That somebody could create this.
Yeah.
I less and less can understand this.
Yeah, it really speaks on a very visceral level, doesn't it?
Yeah, sometimes you play a piece and you're just happy that it exists.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Well, you've sort of answered the next question, which was, what do we think makes Haydn 104 unique or special? But I want to modify that and maybe go a little broader. So when he went to London, he wrote these 12 symphonies. There's 2 sets of 6. And so in those 6, how do you think those 6 sort of differ from the first symphonies that he wrote up until that point? I mean, Bernhard already talked a little bit about he had an expanded orchestra, but musically as well.
That's a very important factor, that if a composer suddenly has more technical abilities to express himself, that is very, very clear. When you listen to this, also 103 and 101 and 100 and so are more massive, more expressive, more power, more. That's really very significant. This difference.
Yeah, it's funny in his earlier works. At one point, I was reading he had a really great horn player, so he wrote this horn signal symphony, and then the horn player moved on. And at one point, he had an amazing bass player. And in fact, supposedly, he wrote a concerto for the bass, which doesn't exist anymore. There's a cadenza.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Apparently, a cadenza for it exists in the hand of his bass player, who was named the Brave Pischelberger. Which
interesting.
Yeah.
But he wrote then these sort of little. In quite a few of his early symphonies, there are little bass, like violone solos for the bass. So he definitely wrote for the people that were around him.
Yeah.
And he must have had some phenomenal cellists.
Yes.
Because
and there's that Sinfonia Concertante for bassoon and violin and cello and oboe, right? That's very unusual too. Yeah. Must have had people in mind specifically, and
Oh yes, yeah. That was.
No, why would you write a piece which nobody can play? So there must have been people.
Yeah.
I mean, the D major cello concerto is insanely difficult, and somebody could play this.
Yes, yeah, that's true. Yeah, I know that his sponsor, Prince Esterhazy, spared no expense. I mean, he really. He tried very hard to give Hyden the orchestra that Haydn wanted. And
I think it's a bit of misunderstanding that one thinks, only today or in the last 60, 70, 80 years, players are on a level which never before.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
yeah.
I mean, why on earth would Mozart have written a thing like Queen of the Night if nobody could have? And if they could have sing that, they were fantastic.
Yeah. That's true. That's true.
I often think that with the oboe concertos that Vivaldi wrote for the hospitale girls, because some of them are really hard. Wow, they had a lot of time for.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
Yes, it's good, and he wrote. I think also he wrote for people of lesser stature. I've read stories where he was unhappily married, and so he had affairs. And one of the affairs he had was with the wife of a singer. They were a singing couple, basically, and the man was okay, but the woman was not very good. But he managed to keep them both employed for about 10 years. And he just simplified her parts in whatever areas that were happening.
Oh, I know how much you love to sing the middle C.
Yeah, so, he was definitely a very practical man.
Yes. Yes, he was. Yes. Yes, and it's amazing. He sort of we don't realize how much he solidified the forms that we use too. Like again, Bernhard was sort of mentioning earlier that the string quartet is what we call sonata form, where there's a melody and then a second melody, and then you develop those melodies and you come back to the melody again at the end. He was really very, very influential in creating that.
Yeah.
Well, there was one funny music critic who said every minuet that Haydn wrote could be put to the words, "Are you the O'Reilly that owns this bar?" So, da, 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 da. So anyway.
It's amazing where you get your stories from.
Books. Books, anecdotal books, really. That's my favorite Haydn story, and I tell it all the time, and I apologize if people have heard this, but when he died, Vienna was being threatened to be invaded, I think, by Napoleon. I think it was Napoleon. Yeah. Anyway, there was a war going on, and so they deferred his internment in an official grave until later. And before that happened, medical students broke into where his body was stored and stole his head. At the time, phrenology, where you examine the bumps on the skull, they wanted to examine Haydn's skull, so they stole it. And then when this was discovered, the emperor demanded that the medical establishment give the head back, and so they just gave the emperor someone else's head. And it wasn't until early in the 20th century that Haydn's head and his body were reunited and buried properly.
Well, this undo.
Yes. So anyway, perhaps, do you guys have any stories of playing other Haydn pieces that you remember? Like, what was the first Haydn piece that you played, Bernhard, that you conducted?
It was played probably as a child, some simple minuet which I just could play on my cello.
Right. Yeah.
That was probably the first Haydn.
Did you ever have to play the concerto as an audition piece or anything? I
played it for the audition for my position in the radio orchestra in Stuttgart. I also played it as a student once with the orchestra.
Right.
With the Stuttgart Philharmonic Orchestra, as a soloist.
Right.
The C major or the D major?
Pardon?
The C major or D major?
C.
Yeah.
Oh, the harder one.
I'm not that crazy.
Suzanne, is there a Haydn concerto for
There is a concerto that's attributed to Haydn, but I think when you listen to it, you know it's not really him.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say that. I think now they say who actually wrote it. One of his students, and a student of mine said he was like Ed Sheeran or something like that. Ed Sheeran. Ah, darn, there's a pop star. I should have known better.
Ed Sheeran, yeah.
Yes. He claims everybody's music is his. So she was Hyden took his student's piece and he put his name on it so that the guy could get more money for it or something. But I don't know if it's true.
Then what probably everybody knows, he gave Germany the national anthem.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that.
This,
Oh yes, that's
the
right.
movement of a string quartet.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
also,
yes.
you know, the Brahms variations on a theme by Hyden. It's not really a theme by Hyden, is it?
There are doubts, yeah.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, a nice take.
Yeah, it's very. It's totally Brahms.
Yeah. Yeah. It's more Brahms than Haydn. Yeah.
And in that piece, it's not really important.
Yeah, very much. Well,
Is
I think
Daniel
we're
there already in the meantime, or still not?
sorry. Beg your pardon.
Has Daniel arrived?
I'm afraid Daniel is not going to make it tonight. So we'll probably we're coming to the end. If anyone has any questions coming, no, I'd see nothing. But does anybody have any last thoughts they might want to share
Well,
on
Bernhard,
Haydn?
I hope we get to do it again together.
Yes.
It'll be nice to play Hyden again. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'd like to
think maybe another Haydn symphony.
88. 88 would be great.
Oh, the chicken, isn't that the hen?
Yeah, but 85 or 83.
Okay.
Oh, no, I was thinking 88, but I like that one. That's a fun one as well. But anyway, I wanted to.
I just hear that it's Suzanne's birthday.
Oh,
Is it? Oh my
somebody
goodness!
spilled the beans.
Happy birthday!
Oh, thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, still around.
Is it to yeah, for you? For you it's today. For us it's already tomorrow.
Yeah.
So for you, it was yesterday.
So
Yeah.
you have Thursday still. We have already Friday.
Yes.
Oh,
Oh well.
well.
I'll make sure I stay here so I can have my birthday for a few more hours.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to thank Suzanne. And
This kind of online encore.
I beg your pardon? Sorry?
When do you do this again?
Oh, we do it again next week. As a matter of fact, next Thursday with Brahms Symphony No. 2 with Holly Matheson will be our host. And I guess that's a good time to wrap up. I'd like to thank on behalf of the symphony Suzanne and Bernhard for being here and everybody for watching. Hopefully there were people watching.
Nice to see you.
Lovely to see you too anyway. I don't care how many people are watching.
Exactly. This was fun. I hope we get to do it again.
Yeah.
And if you are watching, tune in next Thursday so we can do this again. Brahms, Holly Matheson, Brahms Symphony No. 2. All right, everybody.
Awesome. Yeah.
Good night.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Stay negative.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.